On this episode of The Prediction Trade, we travel from Belarus to Augusta, Georgia with professional gambler Paul Krishnamurty. First, Paul speaks to the political fate of the Belarusian president, and up ahead, he offers a masterclass on golf wagering and shares how he's handicapping the upcoming Masters tournament.
All you false pretenders and your freaky contenders trying to be the first. In my own opinion, you am not defending. You are the worst.
Welcome back to The Prediction Trade. I'm Jeff Joseph, editorial director of Luckbox magazine, and I'm joined by Mike Reddy, the producer of this show, also an editor at Luckbox. Mike, our last episode with James Altucher, what do you think?
Well, it was certainly hard to think of a better guest who could speak to not only the nuances of living in New York and dealing with New York politicians, but also trading in the markets about them. I mean, James Altucher, he's a known prediction market trader. And I think what was really interesting about it for me was that I know you were invested in those markets before we had him on the show. Did he change your opinion at all?
He did, and that's an interesting point. And back to your first point about his relevance, he's an author, provocateur, but he's also an investor and he cut his teeth originally as a hedge fund manager and now a very active investor and certainly was on the right side of cryptocurrency. In fact, we're going to have him back on the show sometime to talk about what's ahead in the cryptocurrency markets. But so I considered him to be very relevant, not only being a native New Yorker, just because of his manner in which he looks at investments and the manner in which he handicaps them. He did change my way of thinking, though, to answer your question. I was handicapping Cuomo to not be able to ride out the year in office. And he changed my way of thinking on it. The market's changed in the last couple of days as well. Maybe you legalize cannabis for adults in a state like New York, and you see a four tick upswing, but that's what's happened just in the last 4 days alone. Cuomo's up about 4 or 5 cents, and now the market has it basically at 50-50 that he's going to make it through the year. I got out of my trade suggesting that he wouldn't. Altucher convinced me, and I'm flat that market right now too. I think what was a lot more interesting, though, was his take on the Democratic gubernatorial nominee market for governor. That I found really interesting.
Well, speaking back to the Cuomo thing, the timing of the legalization of recreational cannabis certainly couldn't play better to Cuomo's situation. It speaks to what Altucher said about, more news stories are going to come out. It's going to effectively bury the bad news about him. But jumping to the gubernatorial race, though, I saw that Altucher's pick, Kristen Gillibrand, actually was added to the predicted market.
How about that? Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Predicted was definitely listening to the show. Kristen Gillibrand was not one of the markets available, one of the options available within that market, and she was added within 48 hours of the episode's release. And for what it's worth, I thought that was compelling. I took a position at 3 cents, so I'm long Gillibrand. I think it's a good trade. I don't necessarily, certainly wouldn't be trading that to be the ultimate outcome, but I don't see how from now until all the candidates are slated that there isn't more chatter about her as a candidate. And that should trade up. It certainly should double. So we'll see. So some great trades came out of that episode. I was really excited about that. And I'm looking forward to this show as well. I think we're uniquely covering the most ground we've ever covered, at least geographically in this episode. We're going to go from Belarus to Augusta, Georgia in the same episode as we look at the probability of Alexander Lukashenko, who's the last dictator of Europe. He's the current president of Belarus, and look at the prospects of his retaining his power. Personally, I love this trade, and I look forward to discussing it with Paul as he comes on. I think he's definitely onto something here, and it's a position I also plan to take. And then after that, we're going to have a master class in betting on the Masters. With the Masters coming up next week, our guest is going to reveal his short list of one outright Masters winner and 6 additional each way bets. So lots of value coming up.
Well, if there's one thing that I know, it's that I don't know a lot about Belarus or the Masters, so we're certainly going to learn a lot today.
Well, let's tee this up, Mike. Please introduce our guest today.
Today, we're joined by a longtime friend of the show, Paul Krishnamurty. Paul's a professional gambler as well as a political and sports analyst for global betting sites. The last time Paul joined us was this past September when he shared his best bets for the then upcoming general election in the U.S.
It's been a while, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Good to be back. How are you two?
We are good, but it's all about you as a professional gambler, or as you say, punter. It's all about the P&L. So we haven't spoken to you since the year ended. How did the year end up for you?
Well, the election was brilliant. Best ever. Had a nice long break after that. Just decided to switch up, more or less switch off Twitter for a month. And yeah, 2021 starting good. And I've got a lot of plans coming up for spreading political betting around the world.
That sounds good. Well, is your what's unique about your status as a professional gambler and punter is that you bet across primarily 4 disciplines. It's golf, cricket, snooker, and politics. So I'm curious, looking back on the year on 2021, what accounted for most of your gambling revenues? How would you rank those in order?
Well, let's remember 2020 was not by any sense a representative year because I was overwhelmingly focused on the election. So certainly of my profit, 50% came from politics. And in 2020, all of those other sports took a bit of a hit because I didn't have the time. In previous years, you would probably be working out that cricket is 40% and the other 3 all 20.
And today we're going to tap into your knowledge on the golf market. But before we do that, and we're great to have you because you are a professional bettor in golf, and you're going to take us to school later on in this episode. But it's politics is how we've met. And Mike reminded me that you had a high return on a Luckbox lockbox.
I would put it in what I call a lockbox.
Thanks, Mike. I always like when you play that clip. So that's Daryl Hammond in 2000 playing Al Gore on Saturday Night Live. That famous debate scene. But a lockbox pick is something that we refer to a lot during the election season. It's a sure thing type of wager. Typically, our guests will point to something that's trading in the high 80s, around 80% or the low 90s as a lockbox sure thing. But you ventured way out, as we recall. Last time we had you on, we were going into the general elections in the United States, and all the focus was on the 6 to 7 swing states that existed, Michigan being one of them. And as I recall, and this clip will show, you went out on a limb to give us a lockbox trade, a high probability outcome trade. So, Paul, what do you have for us?
We have Michigan presidency market, Joe Biden at 71.
And you ring our bell. What was interesting about that pick, and the reason we brought it up again, is typically, first of all, as I said, lockbox trades are typically higher probability outcomes, trading as high as 80 or 90 cents, meaning 80% or 90% probability of an outcome. But this was down at 70 cents at that time, representing about a 40-cent trade to take, or 40% return to take it from 70 cents to a buck on the outcome. And Michigan was very much in play throughout the election, but you had it nailed as a high return lockbox. So hat tip, kudos to you on that trade.
Thank you. Yeah, that was it wasn't as easy as I'd hoped on the night. Got a bit stressful.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Well, you and I were chatting the past couple of days in front of this episode because as soon as we knew we were going to do an episode on the Masters coming up, we knew right away that we were going to come back to you as a golf trading expert. But as you and I were chatting the past couple of days in front of this episode, you made a passing reference to the Lukashenko market on predicted.org. And I'd been following that Lukashenko story. He's called the last dictator in Europe. He's the president of Belarus. He's been there for 6 terms. And last August, there was an election. and he probably lost that election, but it was likely a rigged election, and he ousted his challenger, who's now in exile, and that story has not gone away for him. In fact, there's been a confluence of events in the past couple of weeks and a couple of months that have brought Belarusian politics front and center again. So, before we dive into the Masters, let's stop by Belarus for a little bit. And as a reminder to listeners, we're going to take a look at the predicted markets right now. And if you're not already trading on Predicted, go to predicted.org/promo/TPT20, sign up, deposit $20, and we'll match that first $20 you deposited. So there's the market that you brought to my attention is, will Alexander Lukashenko be president of Belarus through the end of 2021? It's not a well-traded market. Only about 35,000 shares have traded, but the pricing is interesting. The yes is 87 cents, predicting an 87% probability that Lukashenko will remain in office through the end of the year. The no is at 13 cents. So a high payout, closer to 6, 7 to 1. You like the no. Tell us why.
Okay, well, there is a danger here. This is head over heart because, anyone who knows what I rant on about on Twitter knows I'm quite obsessed with the threat to liberal democracy from Vladimir Putin and Russia's hybrid war. This is a huge, huge world story, and I think that this battle with Putin is like the centerpiece of foreign policy for the years ahead. So you run through what happened in Belarus, that basically the elections were rigged in true ex-Soviet Putinist kind of style. What was interesting was after those rigged elections, even the dissident anti-Putin analysts in the West were very gloomy about the prospects of any sort of revolt. There was this assumption that Belarus didn't have the strength in civil society. Now, I've been watching these processes throughout, and it's been extraordinary. They are extraordinarily resilient during an appalling winter. They are going out, all age groups in all parts of the country, taking beatings off the police and Russia's paramilitaries and soldiers. It's a terrible situation. I can't confirm, but I've seen pictures of people claiming that concentration camps have been built by the state, and it's known that Russia have inserted paramilitaries and soldiers there. Now, this is in Europe. If the West aren't going to stand up to that, then what are they going to stand up to? And everything we've seen from Joe Biden so far says they are absolutely going to stand up to Russia, that this is the American policy towards Russia on Nord Stream 2, on their interference in foreign politics, on potential sanctions aimed at Putin's inner circle. This is happening. This is a much tougher line than the Americans have taken since really the end of the Cold War. And the question is, do you think they'll win? I think that they probably will. I mean, Putin's a very fearsome character. He's had a hell of a lot of success blowing up politics in the West, right? And he's survived in his own country. But there's been a lot of defeats as well recently. His candidate lost in Slovakia, in Moldova, another
right.
Bitterly poor ex-Soviet country. His people have lost. In Austria, his people have been turfed out, have been arrested. The opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, has much support in the West. It wouldn't surprise me at all if she were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize to make a statement about this. And the question is, if Putin is put under massive pressure by the West, and I think he can be and he will be, he'll throw Lukashenko under a bus at the first opportunity. That's not something they're going to go down for.
Let's step back a little bit, because there's a lot of elements in play right now that are converging that would give that some more legs. The notion that there's that he could be removed from power in some manner. So to step back, on August 9th of last year was the election. And originally it was going to be Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, her husband, but he was exiled as a result of the pressure of him running against running against Lukashenko, who, by the way, again, has been in office since July of 1994. He was the first president. He's been a six-term president. It's 26 years later. So his opposition goes into exile. So his wife, that's Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she steps up. She's a school teacher, but she says, I'll run against Lukashenko. And she likely gathered enough votes to actually win that election on August 9th. So much so that immediately after the election, the United States did not recognize Lukashenko as the president of Russia, which was a unique move for the United States back then. That was, again, in late terms of under President Trump. Likewise, Canada and the UK followed suit, and countries started looking at sanctions. So that occurred. There were riots, there were protests in the street, there was an uprising about the election. Since then, a couple more things have happened. There's been a recent release of a documentary called Lukashenko Gold Mine, which shows the lavish lifestyle that he's been living. $250 million palace in Minsk. He has 17 other properties around the world. He has Maybachs, and Rolls Royces. It's just an incredible lifestyle, all featured in a recent documentary that in a matter of weeks had over 4 million views. So that's caused a lot of unrest. And then just last week, Belarus ordered the arrest of 4 prominent Polish activists. So what Lukashenko's been doing is kind of turning up the heat on nationalism, calling out the Poles for the most part. And that's the tail that's wagging the dog for him, trying to deflect some of the criticism that he's been having. So he's been going strong on this kind of nationalist bent. The Polish minority in Belarus is 3% of the country of a 9.5 million population. But he's going hard after the Polish ethnic minority. And that kind of raises the history of, before 1939, the western half of Belarus belonged to Poland. So there's a lot going on. And then maybe the icing on all this is that the organizers of the Eurovision Song Contest, and we're Americans here, Eurovision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on March 11th, they kicked Belarus and the band named Mike. What's the name of the band? Galaxy Zemesta. They kicked them out of the Eurovision contest. So Belarus has no representation because the band that was chosen, obviously by Lukashenko, had such nationalist lyrics that included, I'll teach you how to dance to the tune. I'll teach you how to take the bait. I'll teach you how to walk the line. It was essentially a propaganda song that was entered in the contest. And for Belarusians to be kicked out of the Eurovision Song Contest is like a country being, disinvited to the Olympics. It creates quite a turmoil. Mike, do you have that song, by the way?
Я научу тебя плясать под дудочку. Я научу тебя клевать на удочку. Я научу тебя ходить по струночке. Ты будешь всем доволен, рад всему.
It sounds pretty poppy, but with lyrics like "I'll teach you to walk the line," it was considered to be pretty reprehensible to the Eurovision Song Contest organizers. So the convergence of all these events is creating quite the turmoil and quite the underground protests that are starting to erupt again, and so much so that on just this past Monday, the Belarus authorities announced a criminal probe against Tikhanovskaya, basically accusing her of terrorism is the charge that they're pursuing. So all this is coming to a head. They call this Europe's last dictatorship. But my question to you is really how you started this conversation is, this is still Belarus. This is still like one of the last remnants of the Soviet Empire. And his ally is Vladimir Putin. So what's the real probability that he could be run out of office? How would that happen?
It's hard to measure, and that's why we're backing an outsider. And as I say, on more downbeat times of the day, I tend to think that you think, how on earth will Putin and his gang ever be removed? But then, as I say, there's been a backlash in a number of countries electorally. Now, let's also not forget Ukraine, right, where the twice successful revolution overturned a Putin candidate. You know, the original Trump, Viktor Yanukovych, Paul Manafort's guy, was removed in a
right.
coup. So Putin isn't bomb-proof in the former USSR. That's the point. And we're talking about something that is becoming an international cause célèbre by the day. And, you know, if Biden wants to hang his looming sanctions on a couple of moral issues, well, you go Belarus and you go Alexei Navalny, right? Because clearly the
All right.
plan for Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is the same game. Arrest them on trumped up charge and put away forever.
Well, you've got my attention on this completely, and I think at 13 cents, this is a strong trade. Are you buying this right now
Yeah,
at 13 cents? And you would
absolutely.
buy it up to where?
I'd buy it up to about 20, 19, 20.
So the no for Lukashenko remaining in office through 2021, buying the no's from Paul Motti. I love that trade, Paul. I think because of the payout and because I see it as a trade. I see it as a really high probability trade. The outcome, that remains in question. That's a tough call to project the ouster of Lukashenko after 26 years and being Putin's strongman essentially. But should this trade up to the 20s? Boy, I certainly would think so. So, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, I'd also keep an eye on her for the Nobel Peace Prize as well. She'll be a big price, Svetlana. I'm sure I saw 10, 12 to 1.
I'll ring the bell, but I can't find that market. Does that market exist anywhere?
No, it exists on
Yeah.
sports books. We do it over here. I haven't got it in front of me, but I think it was 10 to 1 last time I looked.
Well, thank you for taking us to Belarus. What I love about this episode today is we're going from Belarus to Augusta, Georgia. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to ask Paul to give us a master class on golf betting like a pro. We'll be right back. And we're back. And of course, with Paul Motti, we usually love to talk about politics, but today we're going to focus on his other love, that's sports gambling. As I mentioned at the top of this episode, Paul is a professional sports gambler in cricket, snooker, and golf. Paul, how long have you been betting golf?
I've been betting golf since around about 1990, so I'd have been about 17, 18. And when I turned professional, it was really the first thing that I thrived at, and that's where my journalist career came from, because I started writing previews for Golf Monthly, both tournaments every week.
So 1990, that means you were around for Tiger Woods winning the Masters.
I
Right.
was, I remember it like it was yesterday. And my favourite, that's my era. If you want a golden era, it's that Tiger Woods, Ernie Els, Phil Mickelson, VJ Singh era. It was just, I just didn't take my eyes off it for several years.
And I'm sure VJ will come up today as well. But in 1997, Tiger Woods won the tournament with a record low score of 18 under par and had a stunning 12-shot victory to win his first green jacket with a 40 on the first 9, as I recall. It was a turnaround on the back 9 that stood out so much. He was the youngest Masters winner also, right?
Yes, indeed. He's. I mean, as well, it's impossible to exaggerate just how good Woods was in that era as well. It truly was watching a sport be remade every week.
Well, it was in great contrast to somebody that was just tipping over before, back in 1986, Jack Nicklaus, at the age of 46. I think that might be the last time anybody over the age of 40 won a Masters tournament. You can correct me if that's right or wrong, but he came back after everyone had declared him basically done, shot a 30 on the final 9 with 6 birdies and an eagle on the last 10 holes, and won the Masters in 86. So when you have Nicklaus followed by Tiger Woods, that is a golden era. That's a great time to be involved in golf wagering. So what have you learned? You're going to take us to school. What I like so much about this topic today is I know the game. Mike and I were talking about this quite a bit. I know golf. I love watching golf. I don't play well enough to be a contender at all, but I have never ever placed a wager on golf, and I've bet on practically everything there is to bet on, from the financial markets to sports wagering and to political markets, and I've never placed a golf wager before. So this really is a masterclass. Mike is in the same boat, and we said, all right, well, Paul's going to take us to school and teach us how to bet golf. So let's start with that, and we'll do it, of course, in the context of the Masters, because we want our listeners to walk away with some actionable wagering ideas for the Masters. But let's start with golf betting in general. What do you like about it?
Well, I think the reason why I became so converted to it was twofold. One was just generally the excitement of a final day. You know, if you like betting, and I was always a bookie, I like pricing things up in running. You know, it's just so brilliantly exciting when there's 3 or 4 players all closely matched, and player goes in the water, drops 2 shot, the impact it has on the betting. So that was all very exciting. But when I turned pro, particularly, I just found it. I've found many more angles to exploit on golf, because to me, the best betting opportunities lie in the sports that have the greater nuances, or where you need, or where you can do more research, where statistics stand up. So if you take, say, soccer, on the other hand of that, everybody knows the Premier League, right? You can be as clever as you want. There's a million people who know as much as you do. When you're talking about a new course in Australia or something, right, and you're doing that research in advance, and you understand what that course is going to take, and you know all the stats inside out, you've got a big edge. And there's a lot of betting opportunities, because you don't just bet on the winner in golf. I mean, that's the main market, who's going to win the tournament. But there's many, many other opportunities to keep you interested for the whole 4 days.
Well, what you just spoke to is something that I was reminded by an old friend of mine who was an active golf wagerer as well, who made the same case. He said, for data geeks, this is a dream, because there are so many different fields of data to peruse when you're contemplating a golf wager. But the real test is not being overwhelmed by the data and knowing which data matters for the course you're on and for the event that you're handicapping. So being able to separate the driver from the shaft, if that's an expression, to be able to segregate that data and determine what really matters. So on a course, and we'll jump into Augusta right now, on a course like Augusta National, rated among the toughest in the world, what really matters?
Well, this is a really good illustration of that, because first of all, just to say, I mean, there are some statistics that they're not irrelevant at all, and they can be particularly relevant on a certain course, but they're always going to apply to the winners, right? You're not going to have a bad week with a putter and win a tournament. Generally, the players who hit the best approaches to the green are going to be banging contention. So you want the specifics of the course. Now, the specifics of Augusta are that the fairways are absolutely wide open.
Broad fairways, right?
Yeah. So the longest drivers can open their shoulders. That was what Tiger Woods did that day in '97. He just tamed the course, and no one had ever seen anything like it, hitting 9 irons to par 5s for his second shot. And so it's very, very hard to win at Augusta if you're not hitting the ball 295 yards on average off the tee, maybe even more. That's the first challenge, hitting the fairway. Secondly, obviously the quality of the second shot, right? Because these are incredibly complicated, undulating greens at Augusta.
With pretty dramatic elevation changes as well.
Exactly. Unbelievable elevation changes, really quick, very tricky runoff areas. And that, to me, is where Masters are really won or lost. It's about short game. The more you've played the course is a massive advantage. We haven't seen a debutant win at Augusta since 1979. And most players don't really peak there until they've played 4 or 5 times. You see players who've been playing for 30 years, the likes of Bernard Langer, right? They still overperform almost every year because they know it so well. So you need a really good short game and preferably some course experience. And then if we're looking to find the winner, this is a tournament that's nearly always won by one of the top players. The last 35 majors have all been won by someone in the top 50. I would say there's probably no more than 25 people in this with a realistic chance.
And we're going to dig down a little bit deeper into that for a little bit, but let's back up again. Wagering in golf allows a lot of different options. The first is called outright betting, and outright wagering is where you're picking the winner. And because of the high odds for any particular player, those they have high payouts. It's hard to pick a winner. So I don't think any golf. My guess is, and you're going to set us straight here. If we look at the current odds for the Masters in 2021, Dustin Johnson is the current favorite at about 8-1, and Bryson DeChambeau is right behind him at around 11-1, as is Justin Thomas. So DJ on top at 8-1, but you can't just bet one or two players with odds like that, right? So typically on your outright bets, what does that look like? What does a professional golf gambler do when he's putting together his outright wagers?
So, well, in terms of how many selections, I think we all differ. So I'll just run you through what I've done. I don't write outright previews anymore, but I did for years. And my strategy was always that I cannot have more selections than 5, right? Because each way used to usually play 5 places then. So I would stick to 5, and I would probably have 1 or 2 from the leading 5 or 6 in the market, another 2 maybe from 15 to 25 in the market, and maybe 1 outsider, way down 200 to 1 chance. And I'd back as many of them each way, win and place as I could, right? So the general strategy would be, if I get a place out of these 5 players, I'll either get my money back or most of my money back on the whole portfolio.
And to remind our listeners, because we're dealing with some new terms, if you haven't wagered on golf before, each way means you're not only betting them to win, but you're betting them to come in the Masters, is it the top 10? Is that what an each way bet is?
It depends on the firm. It would be roughly, it'll be 7 or 8 with most firms, but there's also an option for the top 10 or for the top 20. So you could just as well have 1 bet on the win and 1 bet on the top 10.
And of course, the odds on those two wagers would be different. So if DJ is 8-1 to win as an outright bet, but if you put him in if you bet him each way, what would be the odds then to come in the top 8, for example?
So
essentially second through 8, right?
I'm quoting UK firms here. So you'd get a fifth of the odds first 8. So it would be about 8-5.
So about a fifth of the odds. Got it. So is that generally the rule, that it's 1/5 of the outright bet?
It's 1/5, and it's 6 to 8, depending on the tournament. As I say, though, you don't have to do that. You could just play the win market, and then you could play the top 10 or the top 20. There's so many options with golf.
Sure. Well, we'll back up again. You recently, or you mentioned to me that you kind of have 5 critical factors that you look at. So I thought we could walk through them quickly. The first being that the cream always rises to the top at the Masters. So tell us about that.
Okay, so the cream generally rises to the top in golf anyway these days. The last 35 majors all went to somebody inside the world's top 50. But if we look at the Masters, that was the top 30 for the last 11 champions. We haven't seen anyone win from starting odds of 100 to 1 plus since 2009. That was Angel Cabrera. Usually, you don't even see very many outsiders in the top 5 or 6. I can remember a few years ago back in Cameron Smith at 300 to 1. He finished clearly the top outsider, but he never got anywhere near the leaders, even though he finished 5th because the leaders were so far into the distance.
Well, that raises the question as to what is the KPI, the key performance indicator that determines what the cream is. So is it a question of current form? Is that what you're looking at, or is it in a course like this? Is it greens and regulation? What's the data point that tells you who the cream of the moment is?
Okay, well, current form is certainly almost essential to go well at Augusta. As is previous course form, you need course experience. So we haven't had a debutant winner since 1979. Now, generally speaking, the best ways of measuring who the best players in the world would be the world rankings, but also some statistics like strokes gained, approach, greens in regulation, strokes gained tee to green, and strokes gained total. Now, all of those stats are going to point more or less to the same batch of people who are at the top of the betting. If you're looking for more of a nuance, I would look to the short game stats, strokes gained around the green, because the scrambling's so important. I'd also look to the par 5 performance because that is where all the scoring is done at Augusta. It's very rare. It's a very rare course in that regard, Augusta. You know, the winner will finish double digits under par on the 4 par 5s over the week. Driving distance also very important, but I wouldn't. And like I said, the approach is really important. I mean, Stokes gained approach will tell you everything you need to know about who's at the top of the game, but it's going to apply to all the top players.
Well, strokes gained around the green kind of perfectly combines the short game skills, right? I mean, that's who would be the top ranked
right.
contenders right there. I know. DJ and Thomas are both rated well in strokes gained. Who else are you looking at there?
Well, here we go. Amongst like the people who could be given a chance in this event, I've noted down the top 10 ranked, and it's actually not as obvious as you might think. DJ's in there, Justin Thomas is in there, Patrick Cantlay's in there, Louis Oosthuizen. Top, interestingly, is a guy called Christian Bezuidenhout from South Africa, who I do think will go very well in this tournament eventually, but he's probably not experienced enough yet. Cameron Smith is another one in there. Kevin Na, I don't think Kevin Na hits it far enough though. Lou Westhausen said, Ricky Fowler.
Kevin Na is actually leading right now in strokes gained. That's his best data point.
Yeah, that's key. That's his key skill. Kevin Na is brilliant around the greens, but he isn't probably long enough to contend at Augusta.
So, if you were to look at greens in regulation, right, which is basically the higher the percentage, the more greens that are hit in regulation, right? So if you're on the green on your second shot on a par 4, that is the equivalent of hitting the green in regulation. Dustin Johnson ranked first the week he won last year, and same with Tiger Woods going way back. Patrick Reed was 21st in GIR, but he also has a really good short game, right? So
yeah.
Do you see that as a priority or not as much? You prefer strokes gained and par 5 performance as criteria?
I think the greens in regulation is the most telling stat there is in the game, probably, right, as to the well-being of a player. The only reason I say it's maybe not that much of a guide is that all of the top players will have good green in regulation stats. And by definition, you're not going to win an event if you don't hit a pretty high percentage of greens in regulation anyway.
I think that's a difficulty that I have sifting through this as someone who's aware of probability and odds, but not an experienced golf gambler, because you always hear about the importance of current form, right? But it's kind of hard to define what current form is, because momentum doesn't really exist in golf you don't have back-to-back tournament winners. Byron Nelson once won 11 in a row in 1945, and Tiger Woods, he won 5 or 6 straight tournaments at some point during his peak, but back-to-back wins just doesn't happen that frequently in golf. So the question is, then what really are you looking at? And in the last 4 years, I see that only JT, DeChambeau, and Brendan Todd have actually won back-to-back PGA Tour events.
Yeah, quite.
So narrowing down on that key stat, and then you're saying that the top golfers will all be competitive in whether it's greens in regulation or par 5 performance or strokes gained. So there's nothing really then that stands out. It's a composite.
Par 5 performance actually might be, because there's some quite interesting numbers in there, because you certainly would assume all the top players will do well on the par 5s because they all hit it a mile. But what's notable is that some of the top ranked players there, Sung Jae Im, who was second in the last Masters in November, Cameron Smith, Brian Harman, these aren't the market leaders at all, and yet they've got tremendous par 5 records. Another one is Corey Connors, who we'll get to later, I'm sure, when I'm going through my picks. So, you might find some good outsiders. I do think the short game thing is really critical because, especially at this time of year when it's likely to be dry and fast running, so much will boil down to how well you scramble over the weekend when it's really fast.
Okay, well, we have 4 more factors on your short list of 5 factors to run through, and we're going to do that, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. And we're back with Paul Krishnamurty, and he's taking us to school with a masterclass on golf wagering. Paul, you're walking through your 5 critical factors, the first being the cream always rises to the top. And moving on to number 2, that excellent recent form is near essential. That recent form is near essential. We just spoke to it a little bit, but what more can you tell us about how the Masters looks when evaluating this criteria?
Well, for example, so of the 21 champions this century, 12 of them had won in that calendar year, and that's quite a small group of players, of course, because we've only had 3 months and 2 major tours. So who has won this year? We have 13 players. We have Dustin Johnson, Justin Thomas, Bryson DeChambeau, Colin Morikawa, Bruce Koepka, Patrick Reed, Paul Casey, Daniel Berger, Kevin Na, Tyrrell Hatton, Harris English, and Billy Horschel.
And to be clear, those have each won already in this calendar year.
Yeah. So to narrow it down further, 5 of the last 7 champions had won one of their last 5 starts going into the Masters. At the moment, that applies to 7 players: DJ, DeChambeau, Thomas, Morikawa, Reed, Berger, and Billy Horschel. And should anyone else win this week's Texas Open, Jordan Spieth, for example, who's the favourite, they would join that list.
Well, your third factor gets to the fundamental argument about what's more important, course or current form. And your third factor is that 3 courses correlate well to the Masters. So if you're questioning whether you're putting more emphasis on the current form of a player or how well he performs on a comparable course, which are the courses that correlate well to Augusta?
Just so this is a really useful angle, week in, week out with golf. When you're studying the form, you will find correlations between certain batches of courses because they've got similarities. Now, the ones at Augusta that we like are Riviera, which hosts the Genesis Invitational. It used to be called the Nissan Open, the LA Open way back. Decades of form, and it consistently correlates. There was a tournament, the WGC Mexico Championship, that was played at a course called Chapultepec for 4 years. That has a really good correlation. And then on the European Tour, the Dubai Desert Classic, that's got a long-standing correlation. Just to find some players who've got form on those courses, we like Riviera. Max Homa won that this year. He's probably not. He's probably not good enough. He's probably not ranked high enough to win it. Adam Scott's won there recently, but lots of other people who've got good records there, like Tony Finau has been twice. Justin Thomas has been runner-up in both that event and Chapultepec. At the Mexican track, you could also bring in DeChambeau, Rory McIlroy, Tommy Fleetwood. They've all been runners-up there. Patrick Reed's won there. Paul Casey is another one. He won the Dubai Desert Classic this year and has form in the 2. And has form both in the Mexican course and at Riviera.
Yeah, Paul Casey ranked in the top 20, currently has 18 wins, turned pro in 2000, over 2 million career winnings, or 2 million Masters winnings. Do you think he sets up nicely for the Masters?
Yeah, I do. It's a long-standing issue, though, with Casey. He has repeatedly failed to quite get it done at Augusta, but he's got a great, consistent record there, so I'm going to include him in the...
Well, and that brings us elegantly to your fourth criteria, which is that previous Augusta form is a massive plus.
Yes. All bar 5 of the Masters champions this century had previously finished top 20 there. Now, of course, that does apply to most of the main candidates, but there's some interesting ones that it doesn't. Like Bryson DeChambeau has not registered a top 20 there yet. nor has Colin Morikawa. If we look down a bit further, you could write off Joachim Neiman, Tyrrell Hatton, and Matthew Wolff.
Now, DeChambeau got close in 2016. Came in 21st with a 5 over par, and then of course his best performance was 4 under par, 29th in 2019. DeChambeau, by the way, is I saw him. I watched a Bay Hill about a couple weeks ago and saw that wicked drive on the 6th tee at Bay Hill that went a little viral, ended up all over the internet. So that kind of power, I'm sure he has what is that, apex to distance or distance to apex? Must have a high stat there. Does that play well for the Masters?
Plays brilliantly, and he was all the rage before last year's renewal. He might well win. I mean, he's the US Open champion. He's if anyone's taking the game on to another level, like I was saying about Woods earlier, it's him with his extra power. But the fact that he hasn't done it yet at Augusta is quite an important angle, because this really is a unique test. And personally, I'm happy to swerve him at the odds.
Well, he's certainly coming in hot. And I should also mention that Tasty Trade, the financial network that is the owner of Luckbox magazine and subsequently this podcast, happens to be a sponsor of DeChambeau. The CEO, Tom Sosnoff, has a kind of habit of picking winners by evident of 2 exits for private companies, one in the $1 billion and one in exceeding $500 million. So we're kind of watching to see how well he picked this winner and getting on DeChambeau's train as a sponsor. So I thought I'd make that disclosure. But well, let's keep on going. We're on our 4th criteria, which was that previous Augusta form is a massive plus. I thought the key point is what you made earlier, saying that no Masters debutant has won there since 1979. So that's really hard to ignore. If you haven't played the Masters, you're not going to be on the short list here. And that leads us to the 4 stats that you think are most important. Your 5th criteria is look at these 4 stats. You have driving distance. Let's start with that one, driving distance. And of course, DeChambeau probably leads that right now.
He does, yeah. In the top 15 on this, you've got McIlroy, Matthew Wolff, Dustin Johnson, Joachim Neiman, Sergio Garcia.
And DeChambeau leading the tour average at about 320 yards off the tee.
321. Right? What I would say though is, yeah, if you're averaging between 305 plus, then I don't think it really makes much difference. But
that's right.
If you're below 290, 295, you're in trouble.
Okay. Your second criteria is scrambling is massively important. Can you define what scrambling really means?
Scrambling is when you've missed the green in regulation, making a par, getting it down from off the green.
I see. So on a par 4, if you've missed a green in 2, that's a scrambling rating going forward.
Yeah. If you're in a bunker, but it could be from a bunker, it could be from the rough or from the fairway.
So who is ranked among the top contenders in scrambling?
So here, well, we have Webb Simpson, who doesn't have a great record at Augusta, but did play better there last couple of times. We've got Patrick Cantlay, again, who is just like a stats machine. I tend to find us a lot of weeks, you just find a lot of things pointing to Patrick Cantlay. Hasn't won that much, though. Harris English is 7th for scrambling. Another very good player. It'll be a big price. And Paul Casey is 15th.
And Casey. And how about Na? Isn't he on that list?
He is. He is on that list. For some reason, I've written it off because I'd already put a line through him as not being long enough.
Na's an interesting player. I'm curious to see if he makes it to your final cut here. Next is strokes gained. Define that as well for us.
So strokes gained means the statistic compared to the field average. And again, this is strokes gained, how many shots it's taking you from around the green, whether that be the bunker or the fairway or the rough. So again, it's a superior way of measuring scrambling, and you'll find a lot of the same people in both.
Okay, and then your final of your top 4 criteria for the Masters, after driving distance, scrambling, strokes gained, the 4th one is par 5 performance. And again, if you can walk through what that means to us.
That just simply means, again, your performance on par 5s relative to the field. That's how you'd be measured. And again, the top one here is Cameron Smith, who is third, despite not being a particularly long hitter. Max Homer again, who's won at Riviera. That's a little angle for an outsider. Hideki Matsuyama, John Rahm, and Ryan Palmer.
And Cameron Smith has 4 wins, right, since he turned pro in 2013, ranked at about 32 right now in the world golf ranking. He's earned over or about $1.5 million at the Masters thus far. He's out of Brisbane, Australia, right?
Yeah, he's second in November at this course.
So when you look at these 5 criteria and the 4 stats that you have, does the favorite Dustin Johnson, does he come out of that same filter that you've just applied?
Him and Justin Thomas are positive everywhere, right? So there's no negatives to be found there. Whether you'd want to back 2 short price players is another matter, but they're both really rock solid. DeChambeau only falls out because of that lack of a top 20 at Augusta. And Patrick Reed only fails on the stats. Paul Casey does qualify on each count, which is interesting because he's quite a nice price. Although when it comes to my 5 picks, there are other people who I haven't really got into who are among my picks.
Well, we're going to get to those in just 1 minute, but let's round out the field a little bit more. So Dustin Johnson at 8-1 finished at 20 under, winning the Masters and setting a record for the lowest score. DJ was the second favorite last year to DeChambeau, right? I mean, so what happened to DeChambeau? He went in last year as a favorite. I know he spent a lot of time in the trees, as I recall last year. But how would you break down his performance of last year?
I'd just say Augusta, like all major courses, they are courses that take no prisoners at all. If one area of your game, your driving, your putting, your scrambling, is 10% off, you'll get punished there. I think that's all it really was. I mean, I don't tend to, when players fail, unless it's really obvious in front of you that they're not hitting a fairway, I tend to not read much into it. You'd want to see them failing 4 or 5 weeks on spin or 4 out of 5 weeks. Because, a player like DeChambeau, he won the US Open previously, and he's really, for the past 2 years, he's been solidly one of the top 3 players. And I just think he just had a bad week, and maybe he's not that experienced at the course. Maybe he felt the pressure having been hyped up so much. It's notable. We mentioned DJ. DJ now has a wonderful record at Augusta, but he used to have a terrible one. His first 5 or 6 visits to Augusta were terrible. It takes that long to learn it. Thomas has only had 1 top 10, but he's got better every year.
Well, my goal of this, and I hopefully for our listeners as well, is to walk away with some actionable advice here. I'm going to be putting $500 on the Masters based on the picks that you helped me arrive at. So I'll tell you some of my own filters that I just applied, and maybe you can tell me if they make sense or not. Mm-hmm. And it's just probability based reasoning. DJ at 8-1, he's a favorite, but I know that no defending champion since Tiger has won since 2002. So I'm going to take him out of my short list as a result of that. So dropping the favorite's a tough one, but it's hard to repeat at the Masters. So probability says it doesn't happen. Is that a bad thing to do?
No, I agree completely. I'm doing the same. I completely agree. Not going to take anything away from Dustin Johnson. He's actually had a few quiet weeks, but it's very difficult to win these back-to-back, and I don't really like taking single-figure odds. And also, I would also say that Augusta in April is a little bit less suitable to Dustin Johnson than Augusta in November.
Right. And then the other filter that I'd apply is nobody over the age of 40 has won since VJ back in 2000. I think it's just, it's a grueling course. So I think you can lop off a couple players there, even though it's contrary to the notion of experience, because obviously Augusta form is critical. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think the older players are competitive here?
Well, I think I think they could. I think if there's one, it's interesting. Generally speaking, it is harder for 40 plus year olds. But if you take Casey, he's probably as good as he ever has been at 43, and you can carry on. The other thing I say is that of all the tournaments in the year, the big tournaments, there's only two where the older players really can come into their own, which would be the British Open and the Masters. And the reason being because of the specific, unique conditions. So, I mean, in recent years in Masters, we've seen Fred Couples go brilliantly in his late 50s, right? And we've seen Langer repeatedly go well in his late 50s and 60s. And I mean, we started talking about Jack Nicklaus earlier. There was a year, I mean, what year would it have been? It would have been about 2002, something like 15, 16 years after that last win. He came back and he was in contention on the Sunday because, they know these guys, they know those greens perfectly. They know those holes inside out. So we'll get into this with a pick because I've got another older player I want to pick.
Well, let's do it.
Okay. So we've got 5 outright picks, first of all. We have Justin Thomas. I can't find anything wrong with Justin Thomas's chance whatsoever. He's got better every time he's played there. He's due another major. He's just won the Players' Championship, which some people call the fifth major, in very impressive style. So he's my main bet.
Okay, so Justin Thomas was about 11 to 1 right now. Yeah. He was 4th in 2020. He was 12th in 2019 and 17 in 2018. You have him on your final 5.
He's my main one, yeah. Now, So him, in Thomas's case, I will back him just to win. Okay. Now, the other 4 I will back each way in some form or another, either an each way top 8 or maybe a win and place of a top 10. So, first of all, Tony Finau at about 25 to 1.
25 to 1. Tony was 38 in 2020, came in 5th in 2019 and 10 in 2018. So he's been a contender for 3 consecutive years at 25 to 1. Right.
Yeah. Now this guy is a perennial nearly man. He never wins. He won 1 tournament in Puerto Rico and he keeps on coming second. He's been second 3 times this season. It's got to happen sooner or later, but the beauty of it is you nearly always get a good run for your money each way with Finau, and he's already proven on the course.
Yeah, ranked in the top 13 right now globally, and has only taken home about $750,000 from the Masters thus far. So Tony Finau. Okay, next.
Paul Casey, who we've already mentioned, he's had 8 top 20s here. He's another nearly man. He won the Dubai Desert Classic, which is a really good form pointer. Just to mention that, we had both Garcia and Danny Willett produce relatively unlikely Masters wins straight off they've won the Dubai Desert Classic. Ernie Els and Tiger Woods used to repeatedly transfer form from one to the other. So I'll definitely have Paul Casey each way.
Okay, Paul Casey each way.
Okay, next, bit more speculative, Daniel Berger, because I think he's improved out of all recognition. Remember him coming on the scene around the same time as Spieth and being ranked similarly, but Spieth immediately got it done. Berger's taken his time, which is far more usual for a player.
Berger's ranked in the 15th globally right now. He's had 4 pro wins since he turned pro in 2013. He's out of Florida, and he's won about 300,000 at the Masters.
Yeah, and I think we're looking at about 50 to 1 on Berger with Bet Online, which seems like a nice price. He's won a tournament recently at Pebble Beach. He hasn't played Augusta since 2018, since when he's improved massively. But he played pretty well on all his previous starts. Made the cut, finished 10th on his debut. So I think we'll get a big week from him.
Okay, and your 5th pick.
And finally, we've mentioned him already, Cameron Smith. Runner-up here in November. Probably better suited to an April Masters with dry conditions. Was 5th in 2018 with very inexperienced. He's got a brilliant short game, great records on the par 5s. Kind of player who really gets the most out of every round, which is what you want in a major.
So you'll bet just JT to win, and the rest of these are going to be each way bets. So again, that's JT, Justin Thomas, Tony Finau, Casey, Berger, and Smith.
That's right. And I have 2 more for the specials markets.
I see. So specials, is that a term then that refers to long shots essentially, or prop
Well, no,
bets, or
so
what?
yeah, prop bets. So, for instance, the most popular prop bet is a head-to-head, right, on either against another player over the tournament or over that round that day. So it's a good way to back those players that you think will have a good tournament but don't think they'll win.
Okay. Who are your long shot players?
So, first of all, Corey Connors from Canada. Excellent striker, tremendous iron player. He comes in off two very strong efforts in Florida of late. He was 10th here in November, only his third effort at Augusta. He's 125 to 1 bet online. I think that's fair value, and he'll perform. Talking about the prop bets, I think he'll perform a lot better than most of the other players around 100, 125, 150 to 1. So I'd look to take one of them on with Connors.
29-year-old he's ranked number 41 globally right now, and he's had a win, and he's taken home over 300,000 from the Masters.
Okay, and finally, a bit of a romantic bet, a bit of a fun bet, but let's go with Phil Mickelson. Right? Not to win the event, not over 4 rounds, but we could back him for first round leader maybe at a big price, or for 36 hole leader, or maybe for top senior. Mickelson was always twice the player on this course. It was absolutely made for him. It favours people who hit it left to right. And all of that space off the tee just allows him to use his imagination. Now, he's a senior now, plays on the Champions Tour, right? You would expect him to be competitive, but he played well on his last 2 efforts on the PGA Tour in very strong events, top 35 in both. He was top 20 here in April 2019, and he's fared respectably in the opening rounds, in all the recent opening rounds. So, thinking again back to all those years when Fred Couples defied the odds in semi-retirement, Phil's your man this week.
That's a really fun bet.
Yeah.
Mickelson first showed up at the Masters in 91 at Augusta and played again in 93. Then since 95, he's played every year. Every single year he's been at the Masters. So he definitely has the course form down. In 2015, he came in second. So, and then of course, third in 2012, and he won in 2010. So he's got a lifetime of 8 million in earnings out of the Masters, and still just shy. He's just outside the world golf rank right now at 106, just outside of 100. But that is definitely a romantic favorite. He is 51 years old, which would put him off my list, but I recognize the fun in having Mickelson in play. So I will.
You'd be amazed how many times as well in majors on the first day or the second day, either a former champion way past their best turns back the years, or a teenager, the next brilliant young thing, does it. And then over the 4 days, they fall away, right? Because the form book stands up. But
Right.
I put Mickelson in that category. He'll perform well and maybe make a few headlines.
Well, I'm going to ask you for one special prop bet before we let you go. But before I do that, let me just do a quick wrap up of your short list again. In the each way department, it's JT plus with an outright bet, Justin Thomas, Finau, Casey, Berger, and Smith. And then in your long shot categories, you have Connors and Mickelson. Is there one special prop bet that's that you feel a gambler has an edge on, or that in golf that you particularly like?
My favourite bet is definitely the head-to-head, but unfortunately we're too early to see them because they haven't really been priced up yet. So I'll go with the finishing position, the place side of this. And for me, it's Tony Finau top 10 at around 5 to 1. I think you'll definitely get a very good run for your money out of that.
Okay, I think you just finished my betting card for that. So that's this is Paul Motti. He's a professional gambler, cricket, snooker, and golf, and of course politics as well. And it's good to have you back in golf form right now. And we're going to check back in with you after the Masters to see how things went. You can follow Paul, and you should follow Paul at Paul Motti, PaulMotty, on Twitter, or check out his website, politicalgambler.com. Paul, it's always great having you on. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Well, thanks again to Paul and Mike. Where do we go from here?
Well, before we sign off, on the next episode of The Prediction Trade, we're pleased to welcome back our friend Anthony Scaramucci to talk about political betting and cryptocurrencies.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that. Anthony is indeed a friend, and it was a lot of fun when we had him on last time. So look forward to having him back. And I guess that's all we have for this episode of the Prediction Trade. If you like what you've heard, tell your friends about us and make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out thepredictiontrade.com to sign up for our newsletter, find us on social media, or just to send us a message. And you can also find the Prediction Trade in print, each issue of Luckbox magazine. Go to getluckbox.com/TPT to read the latest issue of Luckbox digitally for free. So thanks again for joining us. This is Jeff Joseph.
And I'm Mike Reddy.
And remember, always wager responsibly, believe in math, master your trade, and join us next time on The Prediction Trade.